car order. It's always been car order.
I strongly disagree.
That's the way it is. Rip him out through the window in a nice way.
Just so I can go down and drink a carton while everyone punches on.
Just pisses me to tears. That's the worst thing you can do.
You shut up, you hack. Talking about boat ramps, this is what I wanted to get through from the start. What he said.
Oh, you just been an idiot.
And welcome to the Chumming Up Podcast, the fishing, spearfishing and ocean adventure podcast that thinks there's two great Australian fish. One is a marlin and the other one is a Murray Cod. I am Squirrely, and with me, as always, is Lee Leewald Mitchell, the top Murray Cod fishery in the world, or in Australia. Well, it's both. Yeah. And we're lucky enough to have a guest who knows far more about Murray Cod than either of us, Stuart Rowland. How you going?
G'day, fellas. I'm really good. How are you?
Yeah, great, mate. We do just, well, obviously, we're on top of the world, having a day fishing.
Gun fishermen, I'm pleased to be talking to two gun fishermen. Leading the comp.
We'll pay you for calling us gun fishermen, lucky fishermen.
Yeah, we're running with that.
You're modest, yep.
You've just given a speech we're at the Cod Nationals in Mulwala, and you've just given a speech to everyone about the Murray Cod. Yes. First of all, I'm not sure if you mentioned it in the speech, but obviously, like, I got into the Murray Cod saying same as everyone for, the women.
Yep.
What did you get into Murray Cod for? What brought you in? Was it the same?
It was probably a little bit similar. It was reproduction, but more. No, mate, it was really, I was always fascinated with fish, and particularly fish reproduction, and when I was a kid growing up, and I would catch brim and flathead and blackfish and so on, I used to always like to cut them open and have a look what they'd been eating, and what sex they were, and whether they were close to breeding or whether they'd finished breeding or whatever. So that was as a teenager. I live in coastal Sawtell in New South Wales, and it just fascinated me, the way fish lived their lives. And so I was fortunate enough to eventually go to university and to study biology and to concentrate on fish. So I've had a great career, and I've been very, very fortunate.
Yeah, it sounded like it, like a lot of stuff. Obviously, when did it come? Like, you started with fish.
Yep.
When did you start to concentrate more on the native Australian fish?
Well, I was going to uni and working a little bit with New South Wales Fisheries, and at the time I was working on brim, and there was a few issues with brim. There was the black brim and the yellowfin brim were hybridising, and I sort of was asked to confirm that and identify the taxonomy of these intermediate fish, and they turned out to be hybrids between those two species on the south coast of New South Wales.
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, no, and it is interesting, and it only happens in certain conditions. So normally they breed separately, even if they're in the same estuary. They normally breed slightly at a different time and a different salinity. But there are occasions when the two species get trapped in a lake, and so they then tend to breed together. And because they're really closely related, they're both in the same genus, there's been some success. So some of the eggs obviously fertilise and hatch, and the larvae survive, and you get these intermediate fish that are actually hybrids between black brim and yellowfin brim. So that was my early fisheries research.
So sorry to go off topic, even though we're talking about
Murray Cod.
So the intermediate fish, are they like a mule? Can they not breed themselves?
Both. With the brim, I found no evidence of them actually interbreeding, but I think there's some scientists since have found there's a little bit of breeding back to one of the species, and I'm not sure whether it's black brim or
the hybrids.
Back. Yeah, but they're not completely fertile, which means they might breed amongst themselves and breed with other species. But they actually, there is some back crossing as it's called. But we still consider, even though that's occurring, that the two species maintain their integrity, basically. Their biology when they breed and so on. So we still consider them two good species, black brim and yellowfin brim,
Yeah. It's just interesting.
Yeah, fascinating and that's fish. That's another thing with, why I got into fish. They're just fascinating biologically.
Yeah.
There's many fish are actually hermaphrodites or chain sex.
Yeah.
It's quite common in fish. Flathead are a good example. Not the Australian flathead, but overseas. Barramundi chain sex.
Yeah.
So most barramundi, when they're young, up until 2 or 3 years of age, are actually males. And then they change sex and breed as males, and then they'll change sex later. and stay down on the coast and the estuaries and so on. And so all large barramundi are actually females.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's
not
a
on,
good,
not
good
on
example.
Trump's watch.
Yeah, well...
Yeah.
Maybe
No, Trump might have something to say about it.
Trans movement's gone.
Yeah.
So brim don't, though, do they?
Good question. When I was studying the hybrids, I found a population of brim in a lake called Hoyers Lake on the south coast of New South Wales near central Tilba, and we're sampling, and they all looked like black brim, and they were black brim in this lake, and it was closed off from the sea. But when I had a look at them closely, that is, cut them open and have a look at their gonads, and then do some histology, so cut them small sections and look under the microscope, I found that the black brim in that lake were actually changing sex.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So they were breeding.
That's because of the landlocking.
Yes,
situation.
it is. And I think those environmental pressures then put pressure on the fish to, and the sex determination in fishes, we call it labile, which means it's loose. It's not as hardcore as, say, as in humans. But so some fish will actually, their sex determines on the temperature or the environmental conditions. And what I think with black brim was happening is when there's harsh environmental conditions and low numbers, they'll breed. Most of the fish are females, so you get maximised egg production. They breed with a few males because there's plenty of sperm, and there's success. But then later, some of those fish will actually change sex after they've bred once or twice. And we were able to see it because we had fish with a complete and operational testes, like in the breeding season, and these little orange sort of defunct gonads, ovaries, sitting on top of the testes. So it was quite spectacular to see, and quite strong evidence that undergone sex change at some stage.
Okay, that's interesting because we had another scientist on the other week talking about estuaries in the southwest of WA.
Yeah, I do know. I know of them, yes.
Yeah, so he's been researching a lot of the ones that get landlocked, and the salinity gets to such a high level.
Yep.
And they found these mullet that survived in the saltiest water of anything.
Yes.
And everything else had died, but they were doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't eat was the view, so they were absorbing their own gonads as.
Oh, okay. So as energy. Oh, really?
Yeah, that's how he explained it to me. Yeah. They ended up dying anyway.
Okay. Yeah.
But they recorded them in the most saline water that any fish has.
Been. Yeah. That's really. I hadn't heard of that, and that's really interesting. Yeah. Yeah, and it just shows the lability or how flexible they are. Another explanation could have possibly been that because it was getting really, really saline, that they were that by changing sex might have maximised their reproduction if they got the opportunity.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's what I was just thinking then when you mentioned that.
Because generally when animals, particularly the fish that I know of, do change sex, it's for an advantage. They don't do it for the sake of doing it. They sort of they've evolved to do it to maximise their chance of survival under certain conditions.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
Yeah,
it's fish biology. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Wow. So on the other, going back to Murray Cod.
Murray Cod, yep.
In your talk before, basically, you've been at the forefront of when the fishery was collapsed.
Yes.
And now been instrumental on what it is today.
Yeah. Well, we think so. And it wasn't just me. It was a team effort, and there were some scientists from Victorian Fisheries and the New South Wales effort. But they were, I had the opportunity to develop the breeding techniques for Murray Cod, golden perch and silver perch at Narrandera. So it was a major research project. We were most concerned that the fish had declined dramatically in most places and disappeared from some areas. And so really the only way to help them recover was to develop breeding techniques and hatchery techniques. And so, we did that. We did it with Murray Cod, with golden perch and silver perch, trout cod, eastern freshwater cod and Mary River cod. So all those species, with possible exception of goldens, had undergone significant declines. And one of the key fisheries management strategies to help them recover is to actually breed them in a hatchery, but do it responsibly. Make sure you're doing it responsibly in terms of genetics and animal health and so on. And we do that. We've developed those techniques. And then we stock the fingerlings back to where they used to be found. and with hopefully enough genetic variation so that when they breed, they continue and maintain that genetic variation ongoing, which helps continue their evolution in a successful way. It's sometimes difficult with endangered species because it's hard to get brood fish. There's not many brood fish in the wild, and it's hard to get a brood stock into the hatchery to be able to produce the juveniles. But we've done it as best we could over the years, particularly with species like trout cod and eastern freshwater cod that were at very low numbers. And both those species now, in their native habitat where they used to be found, they've now re-established, and they're breeding themselves naturally. Yeah, so it's taken a big step, and it's not. And we aim not to continue producing hatchery-reared fish for a location year in, year out. That's not our role. Our role, hopefully, is to re-establish the populations of those species so that they can then breed themselves. And it's the reason why it's really important to manage the genetic component of those breeding programs so that they've got the best chance of maximising genetic variation and then surviving in the future and evolving in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's cool. And when you say Narrandera, I've actually done a tour of the hatchery there a year or two ago when I was travelling through with my family, and they're continuing that with they just got permission or a grant or whatever to do Macquarie Sea perch.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was awesome because exactly what you're saying. They were telling me that there's such a low brood stock to start with, so it's difficult to begin with.
Macquarie's they're a real worry because we addressed Murray Cod and say silver perch and golden perch because their numbers were down. They disappeared from some areas, but they were also key recreational species forever in white man's history, and even Aborigines too. So that's why we concentrate on them in the late 70s and early 80s. So they're still bred routinely under quite strict conditions and with stocking conditions and strategies. But Macquarie perch is a fish that's really great fish, was once extremely abundant, pretty widespread in the southern tributaries in the Murray-Darling, but just disappeared. And it's been a hard fish to breed, so it's hard to produce routinely good numbers of fertilised eggs and good quality larvae and fry to rear out to stock out. So both Victorian Fisheries and New South Wales Fisheries are at the moment making a concentrated effort to develop techniques that enable them to routinely produce Macquarie perch to hopefully conserve that species and get it back as a well-established species in the wild.
Yeah, that's cool because me and Squirrely have talked before how you said about like the recreational angling sector obviously drives a lot of it, the funding or whatever, because people have got to want these things.
Yeah.
And we spent Christmas up in the Snowy Mountains and we're trout fishing, and we caught a blackfish. It's the first one I've ever caught, and it just blows my mind that we're introducing, like we both talk about all the time, introducing trout in, and we've got these species they're competing against in the same habitat.
And look, blackfish.
But obviously, trout's a huge fishery.
Yeah, that's right. And it's interesting how things have turned. When I first started my career in the mid 1970s, the trout lobby was very, very strong, and there was huge trout fisheries through New South Wales, Victoria, and Tassie. And there was minimum amount of work on native fish, and we really had to drive hard, even internally in the department, to convince the senior people that native fish were important and they needed this research and this support. But it did turn. And we've had these great successes with the fish, and so we've now got resurrected a lot of the native fish fisheries, and the trout fisheries. They're still there, so people can still go trout fishing, but there's still some issues. And blackfish it's interesting. Blackfish is a fish that again, used to be extremely abundant, but now it's really, really rare. And in the 1970s, the old timers in the Riverina told me that they were abundant everywhere, and they're great to eat and they're good to catch, and they never got really big. Yep. But he said they also said they were great Murray Cod bait, so they used to get used as live bait for Murray Cod. But in much of my career, even in those early days, I barely ever saw a blackfish. So they disappeared really quickly, and back in the sort of mid 1900s, and so they're certainly the one that's found in the lower in this part of the Murray-Darling. Well, and we're not doing any work on it. So, there's a lot more work to go. Macquarie's one really needs, because it was a great recreational fish and a wonderful eating fish too. But, blackfish is a fish that really has been neglected.
Well, we're doing the opposite, aren't we? We're
yeah.
actually stocking trout in to compete against it.
Yes, yeah. Trout are a recognised major predator of river blackfish. Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Is it weird that we have bag limits on what are invasive species? Is that strange, like trout?
The redfin's the weirdest
Redfin?
in Victoria.
Redfin's a weird
You're not
one.
allowed to let them go, but there's a bag limit, isn't there?
Yeah.
What's the point?
I
you
don't
keep
really,
it or not?
I don't know what the fisheries regulations are, but there's a lot of evidence, and certainly in the early days of my career, when redfin were really common through the 50s and 60s, and we consider they did a huge amount of damage to fish like Murray Cod and golden and silver. And the reason was that they were huge abundance, and they bred a little bit before Murray Cod in the season, so they bred at a fairly low temperature. So their juveniles were around when Murray Cod juveniles and larvae were around, and so the evidence suggests that they had a severe impact on some of our native fish. But redfin did disappear sort of naturally in some of the rivers, like the Murrumbidgee River and most parts of the Murray River and so on. There's still pockets of them, but basically they've gone, and they require a cool, a reasonably stable environment. They don't like big floods. They don't like droughts because the water gets too high because they're a cold water species. And so water temperatures over mid-20s really stress them and knock them around, whereas our native fish thrive at those temperatures. So they only had a limited period when they had a severe impact, but they did have that severe impact, and they now only exist as key fisheries in certain lakes and locations in Victoria.
Yeah, but they're more man-made environments.
They
so
are,
it's not as
and they're stable.
Devastating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it is interesting because I know I'm on a lot of fishing pages now, the feral fishing pages.
Yes.
And what a lot of people think of redfin now and about getting him into more waters is a bit of a worry on that thing.
Well, I know in New South Wales, and I've been away, I've been retired for a few years now, for 13 years, but there are efforts in certain places to eliminate redfin.
Yep.
So where we want to restock Macquarie perch, we know that redfin can impact on them. So there's been efforts to get rid of redfin from areas before we stock juvenile Macquarie perch into those areas. So we don't really, in New South Wales, it's really a fish that we don't have much to do other with those sort of limited management in terms of Macquarie perch. So it's not even to my knowledge, it's not certainly not a major recreational species in New South Wales.
Yep.
Yeah.
So obviously you were talking about concerns of the rivers going forward on this side of the coast. What's the biggest concern you have, or what could be the biggest change that makes the rivers
degrades the rivers? Do you think?
Yeah. Well, what can happen going forward, or what would you like to see going forward?
Well, certainly the big concern, as I mentioned in my talk tonight, is the Darling River. Or the Barker Darling. The Aborigines call it the Barker, and it's one of our great rivers. And it was one, when I started my career, it was the stronghold of native fish. It was much better stocks of Murray Cod and golden perch and silver perch and catfish than any of the other rivers, the Murray, the Murrumbidgee, the Lachlan, or any northern rivers. And yet now, when we look at the situation now, we've got a recovery of some fish like Murray Cod and trout cod and golden perch back into some areas where they disappeared from in the rivers, but the Darling in now is a basket case. So our native fisheries out there have been devastated by really mismanagement over many decades, and we've been aware of the situation and the increasing numbers of fish kills, the decline in water quality, and the total change of the aquatic ecosystem. And it's now dominated principally by carp and a few other species, some golden perch and silver perch. Golden perch and spangled perch, but species like silver perch and catfish and Murray Cod have disappeared from vast areas of the Darling. And it's a good example that if we don't manage rivers well, we can't manage the fish well. Yep. And so we manage those species really well, but they've been devastated and they've disappeared from the Darling. So it's a real lesson. It's been gross mismanagement, in my opinion, by both state and federal authorities, but it's a real lesson as what can happen in rivers where you mismanage, where you over-extract water, where carp continue to proliferate, where you lose your top predator, and things change and degrade. And so it's a real lesson for even big rivers like the Murray, where we have massive amounts of water taken out for irrigation of various crops, such as nut crops and other things. So lessons to be learned.
Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Oh, it's important, and these are great resources. These native fish are great resources. The rivers are great resources. We have a responsibility, I think, as fisheries, as humans, to manage them properly. There's no more important resource in the world than fresh water, and yet if you look worldwide, our freshwater resources have been degraded enormously, and we're doing it in Australia. To think we have a major irrigation industry on an outback river that's that sometimes just doesn't flow, and this river has been degraded for decades. It's just grossly irresponsible management of one of the most famous rivers in Australia.
So the Darling's not majorly dammed up at top end?
Yeah, no, it's some tributaries are and some aren't. So you've got some of the tributaries like the Namoy, for example.
Yeah,
and,
Copeton and whatnot.
Yeah, so it's on the Guida. That's right. You've got
Yeah.
dams.
Yeah.
Keep it, Split Rock on the Namoy, and Pindari on the Severn.
Yeah, Pindari, yeah.
And Glenline Dam, which is just off the Jimerick that becomes the McIntyre and so on.
Yeah.
So there are the flows have been regulated into the Darling, but they've been
they are.
It's interesting, but they've been regulated since the 60s, and while the fish stocks were affected, it wasn't until carp exploded in the Darling and went up the Darling and really became established, and by the 1980s or the 1990s we were concerned, and by then we had this massive irrigation industry that was extracting water, and look, if there's high flows, then it doesn't matter what water is extracted, but it's at the medium and low flows where these outback rivers are totally dependent on regular pulses of flow of water to connect the holes, to enable fish to move and to keep the water quality good, and they're gone.
Yeah.
They're basically gone from that river. So the river has been so dramatically changed by that over-extraction. Two other things, by carp and by pollution. So we have enormous amounts of nutrients and pesticides and so on that enter the rivers, and we really don't quantify it and know it, but we've got these sort of industries that are polluting the river. And we've seen the Darling as early as the 1990s being just green from Burke to the Murray, and just was blue-green algae blooms and green algal blooms.
Yeah.
And that's totally unnatural. That's totally unnatural.
Yeah, just from fertilisers.
It's from fertilisers and nutrients and nitrogen principally, but phosphorus as well. And the fact that there's all the aquatic plants like the ribbonweed and the lilies and the pondweed, they've all disappeared from the river. They're the plants that are rooted on the bottom, and they've got flowers and leaves to the top. Well, they once dominated the flora in the river in all our rivers, but carp removed all of those very, very quickly once it exploded. And it meant that you then didn't have a sink for the nutrients, even at that low level, and now where you've got an increased level of nutrients with huge agricultural industries in the headwaters, then we regularly get algal blooms down the Darling now. Yeah.
Wow.
And they cause really poor water quality. So they cause depletion of oxygen, extremely high pH, often high ammonia, all these sort of water quality variables that can reach stressful and lethal levels to our native fish.
Yeah, wow. So I got another question for you. My father had a Murray Cod farm once upon a time.
Oh, yes.
And he always said this thing, so I'm going to back it up with you
Yes.
just so I can go and tell him if it's bullshit or not.
Fine.
He said that he was told that there are Murray Cod that will never grow very large because they're like a drought proofing of fish. Like some are like a stunted variety. Like even if they get old, they'll only be small.
Yes.
And they're just basically there to carry the genome through if it's drought times or whatever.
Yeah, but they
Is that
can
correct?
genetically
Carry
a large cod
the
through.
genetics for it.
Yeah. My research, I found no evidence of that in my research. I did find evidence that you had quite extreme cod of the same genetic variety, the same sex or whatever, that were either long and lean or short and thick. And people used to think, there's two types of cod. Yeah, in the Murray. But all it is natural variation, like us humans.
Yeah.
Some fish do really well and get well conditioned. Some are aggressive and eat a lot of food.
Yeah,
and so on.
Some are short and fat.
Short and fat, yeah.
Like they'll have one good day fishing at the start of a fishing.
Yeah.
I'll take one good day.
Yeah, that's right. One good day is better than no
One
good.
good day's enough.
Yeah.
Fucking had plenty of fishing comps where I don't get my day.
But the species itself is very resistant to droughts, and it's got these mechanisms of accumulating a lot of fat. So when times are good, and you know how fatty Murray cod can get in the body cavity or fat through the muscle tissue, that's a mechanism to handle really long dry periods of 1 or 2 or 3 years. So that's part of it. Murray cod also can tolerate really poor water quality, and people are not aware of that, but low oxygen, high pH and so on. They also can predict water movement and water changes. Let me give you an example. One good example is Lake Urana is a big lake in the Riverina, and it fills from little creeks, and when it fills, Murray cod go into it, but they never stay in there and get isolated. So Murray cod never get isolated in Lake Urana or billabongs along the Darling or the Murray or whatever. So they might go in and feed briefly, but they never get caught in there. Silvers and caddies and gold used to, but certainly not Murray cod. So they predict,
The flow's gonna stop.
where the flow is going to stop, their access
And they
away.
run.
Yeah, and there's and people, the Aborigines particularly, tell me in rivers like the Darling, when there's a drought coming, the cod will move into areas of refuge. The cod know where the refuges are in the rivers, the deep holes, where there might be a spring coming into the river, and those sort of things. And so, and cod will just leave areas, and so a native fish can do those. So they've got quite a lot of mechanisms that enable them to survive a drought. So that's built into their genetics, and they pass that on each year. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I think you're getting the hurry up.
Oh, me? No, I'm right. No, she's right. She's right.
You're right.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah, go on.
You
I could
no-
just ask a million questions.
Yeah, we could
We had
start it.
another guy on
Yeah.
here. This is not Murray cod so much, but Nelly. We had another guy on here that believes that one day cane toads will be in the Murray River system.
Yes.
Can
yeah.
they handle these sorts of temperatures? Do
yeah.
you believe they will? At one
Look-
point, they'll move down and they'll be full of all this fresh water.
Look, it's a really good question. And look, evolution and biology are dynamic. And things continually change. And that's what evolution is animals adapting to new environments. And Darwin's, hypothesis was really all about animals having the ability. The successful animals are those that have the ability to adapt and to change. And that's why it's important that animals have got plenty of genetic variation and good numbers. And so what happens is that as animals expand, they might go into areas where at one stage they're not tolerant to it, whether it's a temperature or other environmental parameters. But some of the members of that group will be, and then they're the ones that tend to then breed successfully, and over many generations. And if we look at cane toads now, it's interesting. I live at Yamba on the New South Wales north coast. Now they're really abundant there. So cane toads have moved across the northern part of Australia because they're a very tropical animal, but they've also come down the coast, and so I wouldn't rule out that them adapting in evolutionary terms over decades or 100 years to live in those much colder climates and to be able to overwinter and then to thrive in the wet times and the good times. Their biological parameters will limit where they end up, but animals do change, and their genetics changes. They get selected by environmental parameters, and the selected animals pass on their genes. So, that's something I shouldn't rule out. And cane toads are moving further south. They've come further south than places like Yamba, and so that's a reasonable sort of suggestion. Yeah.
Well, hopefully we don't see them here.
Yeah,
That'd be a real shame.
Yeah, well, it would be a shame. And again, and we talk about carp with our Murray cod and native fish. It's a great example of the importance of biosecurity and not making mistakes in biosecurity like cane toads. Bad decisions can have enormous long-term consequences in ecology and biology, and cane toads are a really, really good example of that. Yeah.
That's about me, I think.
yeah, right.
I've got my questions.
I wanted to know what's the other cod, the Maryborough
Yeah, the
Murray River.
Murray
Murray
River.
River, yeah,
I don't
yeah.
even know what that is.
No, that's fine. We have 4 species of freshwater cod. The family they're in is called Persictheidae, so it's really a family of the temperate basses and perches, we call it on a world scale. But the Persictheidae family in Australia contains 4 cod species. It also contains species like golden perch and quarry perch, and there's a couple of other species. But the 4 species of freshwater cod are Murray cod, trout cod, both endemic to the Murray-Darling River system. Murray cod is endemic to the whole of the Murray-Darling system, the whole lot of it, whereas trout cod is restricted to the southern tributaries, the Macquarie River, and down into, say, the Bidgie and the Murray River and the Victorian tributaries. So the colder climates, that's where it has had thrived till it nearly disappeared, and that's where it has been re-established.
Yep.
The two other species, there were once numerous coastal river systems in Australia, southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales, that had cod in them. So when the early settlers moved in, they found that the Aborigines used to eat a lot of cod and other aquatic animals, of course. And they were from the Burnett River system in southern Queensland down through the Mary River system, the Brisbane River, the Logan, the Albert, Canangra Creek, those sort of rivers, the Richmond River in northern New South Wales, and the Clarence. Now, when I started my research, the only place I could find cod was in the isolated areas of the Clarence River system, and there was some cod left in the Mary River system around Gympie. And when I did the genetic works and some crossbreeding research, we found that the cod that were left in the Clarence River were actually a separate species to Murray cod and trout cod. So it was a separate species. The Mary River cod also was found through genetic work to be a separate species to all the others. So we have 4 species of our freshwater cod, 2 in coastal drainages, and 2 in the Murray-Darling River system.
Do they look similar?
Yeah, they do. In fact, I think, having dealt with the 4 of them, that both Mary River cod and eastern freshwater cod in the Clarence look more similar to Murray cod than do trout cod. So somebody who catches a lot of Murray cod will readily identify a trout cod if they catch one in the Murray or the Murrumbidgee or the Ovens or whatever. Quite different fish, different colour pattern, different mottle patterns, spotted, overhanging upper jaw with a trout cod and so on. They look quite different. Whereas the 2 coastal species, although they're quite different genetically, and they don't yet breed because we've tried it with eastern cod, they look quite similar to Murray cod. So to an untrained eye, people say, they look a lot like Murray cod, and they do. But that's quite common. That's common in nature, that closely related species often look like each other. They've evolved differently and different paths, and they don't interbreed, but they still look quite similar.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think we can hold you up much longer, but it's been
anytime.
awesome.
No,
I think we're going to buy a couple of your books and see if we can chuck one in for, I don't know. We'll do something.
We'll do a giveaway for someone listening.
Yeah.
Okay, you do that. Yeah, that'd be lovely.
But thanks for coming on.
Pleasure, fellas. Lovely to meet the Western Australians who are leading the cod nationals after the first day. Gun fishermen, all the way from Exmouth.
Yeah, well,
WA.
it's like you said, it's all about adapting.
Yeah,
so we've got a fat marlin fisherman who's learning how to fish for Murray cod.
Darwin would be proud of you.
So we're just about to try and pay Tony off to cancel the next 3 days. Stop the clock.
Yeah, you're in front.
Stop the clock. There's a fucking cyclone forming. We can't fish anymore.
Nice meeting you, fellas, and nice talking to you.
Thanks for coming on. That's awesome.
Pleasure, fellas.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh my god, what the fuck is happening right now? Dolphin in the killer whale's mouth? Holy shit. Oh, this is the best day of my life, God. What?
I like going down the pond chasing bluegills, kamikaze.